What's going on, you guys? Theo here with the big review, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and today we are going to be tackling a topic that has been requested quite a bit in my comment section, which is going to be Guild Raid, and in particular the hard mode difficulty. So before we get started, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. It helps me out a ton as a new YouTuber, so let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, I am going to be showing you guys several different options for this, as well as going into a run that I did with the team that I prefer to use. I'm going to try and give you guys as many options as I can. Now, it's tough to be comprehensive with hard mode in particular because there are a wide variety of team comps and characters that you can use for this. To be honest with you guys, the reason I was kind of shocked that everybody wanted this one is this is kind of the more straightforward of all the difficulties, but I figured if everybody's asking for it, there has to be a reason, so hopefully this will be helpful to you guys. And like I said, I'm going to try and do a different team depending on whatever position you're in the game, whether you have collabs, boss syndrome characters, or you don't, so on and so forth. So first team that I'm going to show you isn't necessarily even a team, it's just a comp that I threw together because I want to start out with just general team comps for this. Now, this team in particular you could easily use and do extremely well, and it's one of those things that against the hard mode difficulty, really the better PvE characters in the game are all fine for it as long as you have good strikers for them. Particularly things that can just apply burn, basically. So strikers are going to be a big topic in this video, you're going to notice, but they tend to be important for Guild Raid in particular. So now when it comes to this team, obviously Iori has got one of the better leadership skills in the game for PvE Guild Raid runs or Immortals or what have you. He's always been very versatile in that role, so he's a great leader here as well. You can use him just fine with that increasing attack type fighter's attack by 60%. You can use him just to buff Gonits or even add another attack type in here. And really it just comes down to choose your flavor. What do you have on your roster? You know, if you're not using collabs, if you're not talking boss syndrome, there's still plenty of character options that you can use here, depending on what you're trying to do, whether you're just trying to do a lot of damage or you're trying to use something that is actually going to help you with the shield. It comes down to what you have. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with this first team, because there's really not a hard fast rule against hard mode to where you can't achieve the minimum amount that you're wanting to get, which I will show you guys here. So if we go out and we look at our reward info, really what you're trying to do with hard mode is you're trying to get a minimum of 233 million damage on one key. All right. And that is not difficult with free-to-play characters, especially if they're non-free-to-play characters. You can get there fairly easy. You know, really, this team would get it done. Nameless is a very good option for this, so you could use that. Now, strikers, though, those are important, and I'm going to show you guys a couple of strikers that you are going to want to make sure that you use. So the first striker that you want to look at is going to be Swimsuit K. Now, the reason for that is going to come down to, if you look at his skills here, he's going to inflict burn damage equal to 27% of attack to all enemies every 1 second for 9 seconds. So it is a long duration on that striker skill, which is what you look for with these types of skills. You want the longest duration possible, and at 9 seconds, that's a very nice duration for that. So there's a reason why you'll see him used quite often, and he is actually very strong for this. Now, there is another really good option that you can use, speaking of long burn durations. Find her here real quick. She ends up being right next to another Mai that I have, and it always throws me off. But I believe it is this one here. So, inflicts burn damage equal to 10% of attack to all enemies every 1 second for 10 seconds. So she has an extra second on there, a little bit less damage. But still, all we're looking for is application of the burn, and that is going to help us out a ton, because what we can do, and what you'll see me do with my team that I use, now obviously I prefer to use this team. This is the next team we'll talk about. That's more of a veteran team. But for me, I like to just apply the burn with a striker and then just throw in whatever is going to do the most damage the quickest. Or if I have somebody that I know has a finisher ready, I can swap in and just hit that to do a ton of damage while they have the burn applied. That is very beneficial and very useful for this. So that's a way that you can do that. You'll see me do that quite often with my Boss Syndrome Omega Rugal. It's a strategy that you'll want to try and kind of keep in mind when you're playing through this, because if you want to maximize runs, you do want to pay attention to these things, because there's a lot of little details and little calls that you'll want to make on the fly throughout that can make or break your run, because really one combo from him can kill enough seconds off your clock to ruin your run if you're really trying to get at least the minimum 233 million damage if you are somebody that is not a veteran that doesn't have a nuke comp like this one. Because I can kind of sleepwalk for the most part, just based on the fact that Rachel does so much damage and Boss Syndrome Omega Rugal does so much damage that just between the two, I don't even really need to use K that much. I just use him for his finisher, really, or if they're on cooldowns. So with this team, you will need to be a little bit more conscious of those types of decisions when you're playing. So that's pretty much going to be kind of a general overall talk about general teams, and then we'll get into specific comps. So you can do pretty much whatever you want as long as you have enough investment and you at least have the right strikers and you are watching what you're doing and maximizing on your clock stopping with your finishers and so on. So now let's talk about specific comps, and this is the comp that I prefer to use. And yes, it is going to have a Boss Syndrome character, and yes, it is going to have collab character. Yes, it is going to have a Boss Syndrome striker, but this is the team that I like to use. And this is the team that if you're a veteran, if you are somebody that plays a ton and has had a bunch of time to collect these characters and build them up, this is the team you're generally going to see. Now, really it just comes down to you're going to be using the first two characters, both Kay and Rachel, to apply the burn when the shield's up, get the shield down, and then swap into Omega Rugal, and he is just going to lay on the damage as much as possible. With this type of team, you basically are thinking about your rotations with your team in terms of how many rotations you can get out of the Awakening for Boss Syndrome Omega Rugal, and that's how far this team goes, really. Now, you could actually just cut Boss Syndrome Omega Rugal out of here entirely and just use Rachel and Kay, and you would do just fine. I mean, Rachel, there's actually an exploit with Rachel. I might do a video on it. I don't even know if they've patched it out yet, but there is an exploit with Rachel in this mode with some of the rotations of her skills that you can actually do. And I've thought about doing it on video and showing people, but we'll see. I'll think about it. But Rachel, in and of herself, even without that shenanigans involved, is still ridiculous. And with this type of team comp, you don't even have to worry about the strikers being specifically set for this mode. You can just set up whatever the best strikers are for your team. Now, I do like to use, obviously, though, the Kyo for the striker on the K, but again, that's just because of the Infernal Flame that he applies. However, it's up to you guys at this point. The first two characters are going to do so well when the shield's up that it doesn't matter. This is a cheesy team. I'm not even going to get into specifics. You don't even need to know specifics. If you're sleepwalking, you can probably get 233 million damage out of this team. And like I said, even without the Omega Rugal, it's doable. But let's talk about, because I don't feel like this needs any explanation, and then we'll get into cards and things like that, but let's talk about the super budget option. So this team here is about as budget as it gets, and you don't even really need the leader here. I just put her here because she does have a very nice Red Element Fighter's attack by 65% buff generically. And with these two characters, Kay and Kyo, you could do this foreseeably without ever using a third character, kind of like we talked about with Rachel. Now, Rachel's going to be a lot better at it, but Kyo is really, really good too, and really good for this, so you can do whatever you need to do. It comes down to who do you have. And again, you need burn characters. If you guys don't have burn characters, then default to Team 1, which is just a generic free-to-play team comp of really strong characters that you can just build up. But this is the second kind of option for a budget option for burn. And Kyo and Kay are going to get the job done. You could swap Kay to the leader and then just use Kyo and him, honestly, and you'd be fine. You could use a generic third for just whatever you're trying to do. If you have like a Gonitz, or you have any of the other characters we've talked about so far, you could use anybody like that. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to throw a third in here that was more budget, that actually does do a little bit for this team, because Particularly Kyo would benefit from this leadership skill, and he would actually be dealing quite a bit of damage with that very nice power charge and applying the flame as much as possible. It's up to you. There is one other leader that I want to talk about here that I have had very little time to try and play around with, but I'm actually planning on doing so and doing it in a separate video later. That is going to be this Kasumi. This Kasumi, using her as the leader for this, I feel like is low-key really good. Now, really, you're doing it because, if you guys do not know, we just had her on roulette. Hopefully you guys took my advice, built her up, because she is a really good budget option for some of this stuff. She increases red element fighters' attack by 25% and their burn damage by 40%. So using her as a leader for any of your burn characters is really, really nice. And for this team in particular, it'd probably be great if you put Rachel on here instead of Kyo or Kay. Depends again on who you've got. Do that, and you'd probably actually do really, really well. I'm curious to play around more with this, because in the limited amount of time that I've had to mess around with her in this, she's actually really good. So yeah, that is pretty much going to be it, guys. I hope that this at least instills upon you guys some confidence in the fact that you don't need to have just, all these collab characters, all these characters that you may have missed out on. Don't feel like that's the case, because it's not. Now, as far as cards go, I don't want to get too thick into the weeds here, because we do need to move on to other parts of this, and cards are largely going to come down to what you have available. In general, you'll always kind of want to use the best possible finishers for your finishers, but for specific characters like K here, it makes more sense to use his 5 PG because of the long animation on it. It will buy you a ton of time, and when he does his awakening rotation, he's going to have so much PG that he doesn't care. It doesn't matter if it's 5 PG or 3 PG, he's going to get to it. So that's really good for a finisher and kind of an exception. Another one that you can make an exception for, but I honestly prefer the 3 PG still. Depends on the person. I've heard people who prefer the longer one with the 5 PG, but that's up to you guys. As far as cards for sets and options and things like that, the same general rules of thumb apply here as they always do. If you have Leah set's going to be the best. Depending on the comp, the boss syndrome set, or the boss set, might actually be best for if you're running the super veteran style team. If you're running it on, say for instance, Orochi Iori, you can do that too. You can run it on Gonitz. That set's really good. Akane is the default from there as far as best possible option cards, or set cards for this rather. Option cards are going to come down to cooldown reduction largely, and that is going to be what you'll want to stick with unless a character has a specific card that you need to apply, which is the case of K here, going to be a card like this that is going to increase your burn damage dealt by 50%. So it really just comes down to cards I don't like to get super into with this kind of stuff, because there's such a wide variety of characters we've talked about that any of the best set cards are going to be good. So it just comes down to what you have, guys. If you're really, really new and you don't have any of the fast set cards, then at that point, your best default set card in general for people who don't have any of this stuff at all, say you're brand new or intermediate and you don't have a full set of a lot of these, you default to this. At this point, when you talk about these types of cards, you're probably going to be getting to the point where you're going to need at least 2 keys, maybe 3, depending on how well your characters are built up. But that's by proxy of the fact that you probably don't have as much time invested as a lot of other players. So that's up to where you're at in the game. So that's going to be all for the explanation on the teams, guys, on the cards. Like I said, teams is largely up to you guys. I've given you plenty of different options, both with burn characters, without burn characters, with boss syndrome characters, without boss syndrome characters, with collabs, without collab characters. Every possible combination that I feel like I can here. I'm sure there's other characters that are good for this, but that is just going to be the highlighted ones here. But let's go ahead and move in to actual gameplay and talk about kind of different little things that you'll want to do and look out for when you're playing against this boss. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And I want to use this as an educational tool just to point out a couple of things for you guys. There isn't a lot you need to know, but there's little idiosyncrasies and things. Now, the first big thing that you always want to make sure that you watch out for is don't get comboed early, because that'll just ruin your run right off the bat. Typically, he's not going to be as dangerous on the first character that is starting out against him, but when you swap into another character, I find that he tends to try and default to his combos. So keep that in mind. That's something to look out for. You may want to just roll through him whenever you swap in after you initially start the round. But you go ahead, you jump in here, make sure you're using your strikers as much as possible, and that way you are not wasting them. There are going to be times where you'll want to wait to use them as well. Instances of that would be as far as if you're using a team with, say, a burn striker and you have your Omega Rugal or another character you like to use on Awakening rotation to do a lot of damage when the shield is down only. You would want to go ahead and maybe when they only have 20 or 30% shield, use your striker then, swap into that big heavy hitter. That way they can just take that shield down instantly and then hit their Awakening, and that way you maximize on the amount of time on your Awakening rotation when the shield is down as possible, because sometimes you'll waste a little if you try to do it when you swap in as the shield is already down. Now right here, speaking of shields, I saved my finisher on my Omega Rugal for a reason. Whenever you guys use your Awakening rotation and do a ton of damage when the shield is down, most times he is going to, after he puts his shield back up, use his stun. So if you actually hit your finisher right as he goes to use his stun, like basically if you call it right and you just smash that finisher right as he puts up that stun, he's still going to stun you, but he is not going to do damage, which is why I wanted to freeze that there and show you guys that. Now, basically, once you've kind of gotten all of that, what you need to know is you basically, outside of having your Awakening rotation going when the shield is down to do as much damage as possible, otherwise you're just going to use your skills and try to get to your finisher as quick as you can. Use your finisher. If your character no longer has any PG and no finishers off cooldown, or you can't get to a finisher, swap into another character, maybe they can. Try to remember who has a finisher ready and who doesn't. That way you know who to swap into to save yourself time. That is a big point to remember. Sometimes you'll store a finisher on a character, swap them out for another character. Say if the shield just went down, it doesn't make sense to use that other character necessarily yet, so on and so forth. Put a little bit of thought into when you're swapping those characters in and out, because that is important, and you can exploit that quite a bit. Again, I'm not going to talk about the exploits with Rachel or anything like that in this video. As you'll notice, I don't use them in this video. If those of you who do not know what it is are wondering what it is, I may later on do a video, but I get the feeling it's going to get patched out, so I don't feel like it's that important. I have seen quite a few people using it, but it's an easy one to do. So yeah, basically outside of that, that is going to be kind of the general strategy with this character. It's really not difficult to kind of just stop the clock with these different teams, and really when you're talking about that general team we talked about with, say, Nameless and Gonitz and Orochi Iori, you're going to be trying to just stop the clock as much as possible with that team. That team doesn't really necessarily have the nuky characters because they aren't using the burn characters and so on and so forth to constitute, you know, not trying to just do the clock stop method to every little thing that you're doing. But overall, this is going to be kind of your general guide for the Guild Raid Hard mode. I hope that this was helpful to you guys, and I hope that you guys got something out of it. Whether you're a beginner player or an intermediate, if you're a veteran, you probably don't need me to tell you how to do this, and I'm sure that there are things that I probably missed as far as other characters that can be used here, because again, there's such a wide range of characters that you can use for this that it really just comes down to setting your team up for success, and that is going to be all it boils down to. At the end of the day, you can get by with free-to-play teams. These comps are all you need for something like this. When you start getting into expert, it gets a little more restrictive, and when we get to that guide, we will talk about that. But overall, this is an easier one, and I hope that you guys now understand how you can make it easier on yourselves. But that's pretty much going to be it from me, guys. Again, hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section if there's other characters that you really like to use, if there's characters I may have missed that you think are really good for this. But I appreciate you guys watching the video. As always, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. I will talk to you guys in the next one. You enjoy the rest of your weekends. Peace.
Continue. out.